Network is absolutely free. Just search GS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Looking ahead to our third segment, we are shifting gears from looking ahead to the Thursday night football game tomorrow and switching back to my personal fantasy positional rankings for this week. We did the QBs and running backs yesterday. Now we're going to do the wide receivers and tight ends today. But first, we're looking at the wide receivers, and this has kind of changed, right, because of all the injuries. I was going to say that Justin Jefferson was going to be the first player I mentioned, but of course, unfortunate circumstances occurred there. But overall, that just really broadens the horizons of what this wide receiver market can become. Because, as you know, injury stockpiling, they're always very unfortunate, and they're always kind of leaving you scrambling in terms of fantasy, trying to find a contingency plan. I think that the wide receiver market is more versatile than ever. You can take more chances, you can take more risks. And no matter who you're risking it on, I feel like you should feel comfortable knowing that some of these injuries aren't as worse as you thought. For example, the Justin Jefferson injury isn't as worse as we thought. Yes, the Kupp and Nakua ones are very bad, and they will miss an extended period of time, but there's still situations where you can make different wide receivers work. And so I'm going to talk about some guys who aren't injured and can help you as well. Starting off with the guy who I've been disappointed in especially. I drafted this guy having a lot of hope in him in the Chicago Bears offense because of the fact he had so much experience there already and projected to be the wide receiver one in that three-headed room right there. DJ Moore. I think that DJ Moore, this is a get-right game for him against the Colts. And not for nothing, here's an interesting stat about the Colts this season so far. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. When I look at the Colts, I love their front seven. I love their linebacker room. I love E.J. Speed. I love Zaire Franklin. I love the depth up front. But the secondary leaves a lot to be desired, and I think this is the opportunity. As Hunter 18 has another question, I love to see it. Kind of another part of my question, I have the number one waiver spot. I save it and hope Zeke just becomes a free agent. That's an interesting one. I think that hopefully they can find a way, Dallas, to make Zeke work in this offense, because if they do, it can really open up a lot more varieties and they're not stuck playing with an over-reliance on CeeDee Lamb. But it could be a smart move in the future, you know? Having the number one waiver spot gives you a lot of advantages over other people. You're always the first one, either Tuesday morning, looking at ways to improve your team, and you'll be the first one to get the player should you actually get the whole process done over with. So it's going to be interesting to see the fallout of what the Cowboys do with this offense. Because right now, we have two very contrasting games to diagnose with them. We have the Browns game, which really, if you think about it, wasn't as impressive an offensive performance as we think. And then you have the Saints game, obviously, which really did not look impressive in the slightest. In fact, it looked abysmal for their offense. So it's an interesting plan. I would say if you're really confident that Zeke will find a better situation, then you can have the potential to wait. But if you actually feel like Zeke can be the answer in this Dallas Cowboys offense and get more touches, then by all means, since you have the number one waiver spot, you have the power to make that decision. And a lot of people will start to kind of agree or follow your order as well, because you hold so much power over what they do as well. So if you set a precedent, then it will be interesting. But it is an interesting proposition to think about Zeke finding perhaps a better fit for him than Dallas. So I do think that is a very interesting question. I would say my answer right now is we'll wait and see what the Dallas Cowboys offense is, because I can't really say what the Dallas Cowboys offense is going to look like on a week-by-week basis. But it's an interesting proposition, and I thank you for leaving that question, because it's always something to consider. Looking at DJ Moore, against the Colts. Yes, a lot of it is going to depend on Caleb kind of progressing a little more. We can't necessarily blame the Texans' loss on Caleb that much because he was getting harassed by the Texans' front seven very often. But if they do find a way to protect Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams finds a way to protect himself in turn, look for DJ Moore to be his number one target. I think Caleb Williams has to start respecting the fact that experience in the offensive scheme already gets you farther than just trying to improvise all the time. So, especially against a Colts defense that has weaknesses that they can exploit in the secondary, they can have many different alignments if they so choose, the Chicago Bears. It's going to be a game where either DJ Moore continues to fail to impress or gets cemented as the wide receiver one, and Caleb pretends to be comfortable, or the most comfortable he's been in a game so far as a result. But another guy that I wanted to talk about who has kind of had an up and down start to the season, had a decent game against Tampa Bay this weekend, Amon-Ra St. Brown, another guy who I have, ironically. So two guys that I have on my fantasy football team that I'm telling you about, hopefully having prove-it games this week. Amon-Ra is going to have a fantastic season, there's no doubt. But as we've seen with the Lions, as Hunter, no worries, Hunter. If you have one more question, I'm glad to take it. Thank you for all your comments. Would you rather have Alec Pierce or Wan'Dale Robinson on the bench? I think this one is simple. I would rather have Alec Pierce. Yes, it's nice to have Wan'Dale Robinson and potentially hope that Daniel Jones gets right. But right now, it's a question of which quarterback can get their wide receiver the ball and have more confidence, even though it might take a little bit longer for him and Anthony Richardson getting the ball to Alec Pierce than Wan'Dale Robinson getting catches from Daniel Jones. Now, it is going to be one of those situations where these guys just might not break out at all, and it's kind of a premature look into overreacting to one performance from both of these guys, but right now I would say I have more confidence that Alec Pierce can have another one or two good performances in his season this year because of the potentiality of, as Hunter 18 says, Richardson is his QB, so I'm kind of hoping Pierce was the pick. And I agree with that sentiment. It would be a nice stack, and let's hope that Anthony Richardson's raw potential gets realized and he can find a way to mix that talent that he has with his arm strength with the ability to, we get another comment, with his ability to run the football as well, but we're going to have to see. That's always the question. But Alec Pierce will be the pick. We got another comment here from Taco, who is 2-0 in fantasy. He just got offered Jamar Chase and Kenneth Walker for Kyron Williams and Chris Godwin. Take it. I have Hurts, Kyron, and James Conner are his two running backs. AJB, I believe that is AJ Brown and Chris Godwin. Sam Laporta, the tight end. Jordan Mason as his flex. His bench is George Pickens, Rico Dowdle, Roma Dunze, Algier. Also got offered Tyreek and Chubb for the same. I actually like the first trade a little bit better because I love Chris Godwin. He's had an unexpectedly fantastic start to the season, and he's really gelled with Baker as that wide receiver 2 in Tampa. But Kyron, I've been disappointed in him. I thought that he was going to have a bad season so far, and so far he's proved it. Only 75 yards across 2 games. Whereas Kenneth Walker, yeah, he was out for a long stretch of time, but when he comes into that Seattle offense, we saw it in that game against Denver, when they put the ball in his hands, he really is the difference for them. He's really the X factor in that Seattle offense. So look for him to get a lot of touches going forward when he's at full health. And Jamar Chase, we've talked about him before. Yes, the contract disputes is a huge thing, but he's still the wide receiver 1 in that offense. So I really like that trade. I think you should take it, and this really improves your team as well. If you look at your running back room, you now would have Kenneth Walker and James Conner, 2 NFC West guys who I really like. In your wide receiver room, you have 2 of the best Wide receiver ones were, well, A.J. Brown kind of is a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 hybrid. And then Jamar Chase and Laporta. I love Laporta as well, and Jordan Mason's a good flex to have for the foreseeable future. So I think that this will be a fantastic team if you take that first trade. Tyreek and Chubb, it's a crapshoot right now because Tyreek lost Tua for a long time, and we don't know what Chubb will look like if he comes back or when he comes back, or if he comes back at all this season. So I like that first trade a lot because it adds a lot of depth to both your wide receiver and running back rooms. So thank you for your question, Taco. Good luck to you and your exploits. As Hunter18 says, sadly I have Puka, so I have to start Brian Thomas Jr. Thoughts on him? I think that Brian Thomas Jr. isn't the worst Jacksonville Jaguars receiver to have, but let's remember he is a Jacksonville Jaguar, and that offense has not clicked in the slightest. Yes, he's had a couple big plays. He had the touchdown in the game against Miami, but at the end of the day, it's all dependent on Trevor Lawrence, right? Trevor Lawrence does not look comfortable this season, only 51% pass completion rate so far. So it's really dependent on if this offense can click at all. But unfortunately, I don't think that Brian Thomas Jr., his talent is going to be realized if Trevor Lawrence's ineptitude continue. But that's an interesting question. I hope for you, for your sake, that Brian Thomas Jr. is going to perform very well because Puka looks to be out for a considerable amount of time. But right now, I see no way forward for him in this offense. But let's get back to close out the segment talking about Amon-Ra here. Last week, a little bit of a good performance, a little bit of hope and optimism surrounding what he can still do in this Lions offense. But if you've seen, this offense has become kind of more run-oriented. David Montgomery has had a couple big games. Gibbs also well. But also, Jared Goff feels more comfortable seemingly throwing to Jameson Williams, getting the deep ball going, which is weird because I think Jared Goff looks more comfortable in the short to intermediate areas of the field. So we're going to have to see with Amon-Ra. I hope that Amon-Ra performs. I drafted him 5th overall, for God's sake, in my fantasy league. So for my sake, I hope that he does well. But thank you all for your comments. Unfortunately, we do have to take a quick break. But coming up on the other side, we switch to tight ends. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the tight end position in fantasy, I'll be glad to answer them as well. But you do have to take a short break, and we'll be right back on the other side.